This week, highlights from season 4 of Full Measure. The FBI's main target, the man they claimed for over a year was Trump's unmistakable Russia connection, a spy, wasn't charged with anything.
You've never met President Trump. You've never spoken to him.
Never.
From the government investigation that fell flat to real and present dangers.
Do you believe it's okay for them to go overseas and take up arms against American interests?
Let us be real. People are going to fight back.
To the incredible stories of those who fought the system and won.
People that told you it couldn't be done?
Absolutely. People that told me it could not be done.
We'll talk about some of our favorite stories with the correspondents who reported them in our Full Measure Roundtable edition.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. Today we have a special look at excerpts from some of our favorite stories from season 4 of Full Measure. Also here for the occasion are some of our correspondents, Scott Thuman, Lisa Fletcher, and Josie Sturban. We're going to begin with some of the most enlightening interviews that we did this season on Full Measure, and one of my favorites was with a man named Carter Page, who the FBI wiretapped 4 times, and he was accused of being Trump's nexus to Putin, but never charged with anything.
But in the end, Special Counsel Robert Mueller concluded no American colluded or even coordinated with Russia. The FBI's main target, the man they claimed for over a year was Trump's unmistakable Russia connection, a spy, wasn't charged with anything.
You've never met President Trump. You've never spoken to him.
Never.
If you could say something to him, what would you say?
I would say, having experienced firsthand the witch hunt that he's had to live through, the fact that he has achieved so much is just absolutely extraordinary, in the face of all that. So,
and there's this surprising bit of background, his reportedly long history of assisting U.S. intelligence agencies prior to them deciding he was a Russian spy.
It's been reported that you assisted the FBI years ago in a case of corporate espionage by a Russian, sort of Russian spy case. Is that true?
I had alluded to the fact that, I'd helped out CIA and FBI going back decades. So,
how did that come about?
Going back to my years in the military, I had a lot of relationships.
It stands out as one of the most interesting interviews to me because some of the best kinds are the ones you don't know what they're going to say. You don't know the answers to the questions in advance. And he really surprised me on some of the things that he came up with. You cover the Russian story, the Trump-Russia probe a lot as well.
Yeah, and it's going to be a story that has legs for a long time. So it's an interesting interview to hear Carter Page say those things out loud.
For this past season, you continued covering a topic that we have covered really since season 1, which is ISIS and Islamic extremist terrorism.
Right, and you've heard the president time after time say that ISIS is defeated in Syria and Iraq, but there are still a lot of hot spots out there, and some are very surprising to people, where you have wannabe terrorists and foreign fighters who've returned, and some not too far away from the United States. A tiny Caribbean island, Trinidad and Tobago, when it comes to relation to size, has sent more foreign fighters overseas than from any other Western country. And so we went there, and we talked to find out why from one Muslim leader. Do you believe it's okay for them to go overseas and take up arms against American interests?
If in the case where America is fighting our Muslim brothers and sisters in different countries, and individuals decide to leave and go there and to fight against the American soldiers, that's their call, right?
A lot of people hearing that, especially back in the United States, would find that a detestable comment. They wouldn't be okay with any of what you just said.
So does the American people, the American government, wish that when they go into a country and invade a country and starts fighting the people there, the people should just lay down and, kneel before them and surrender? That's what they expect that's going to happen? That's not going to happen. Let us be real. People are going to fight back.
Kind of sobering to hear some of that firsthand. What's interesting is this is hardly the only place that U.S. intelligence agencies and law enforcement are tracking that they have concerns about. And so coming forward in the next season, we're tracking down some of those other spots, and we'll have them for you.
Terrific. And Lisa, you had a fascinating interview that dealt with capturing domestic terrorists here in the U.S.
Right. So one of our stories led us to the man who started the science of publicly searchable DNA databases. And as you know, those databases have led to the capture of a number of serial killers. The key is a publicly searchable DNA website, jedmatch.com. Kurt Rogers, now 79 years old, founded the site in 2010. He did not anticipate that his homegrown website, built for connecting families, would connect the dots on violent crimes.
What were your thoughts after all of that unfolded?
I learned about it when someone wrote me an email saying, hey, there was a press conference and it was announced that you're instrumental in finding the Golden State Killer. I was confused. I was surprised, did not anticipate it, had no knowledge that it was coming. I was very concerned about our users, what they would think, how they would handle it.
So it's really interesting because the way they caught the Golden State Killer was JedMatch is free. Anybody can upload their information, including law enforcement, and law enforcement was uploading its data to compare to those who were already on the site. That's how they found the Golden State Killer. Well, just in the last few days, JedMatch has changed its terms of service. So nobody, including law enforcement, can just upload DNA to compare to what's already on the site.
Wow.
The users actually have to opt in now.
That's very interesting. All right, and Josie, one of your big interviews was with a woman maybe people had seen and heard about decades ago if they've been around long enough. She was pretty much ahead of her time with the case that she'd brought.
Absolutely. One of the toughest ladies I've ever met. Her name is Paula Coughlin, former Navy pilot. She was assaulted by a number of her peers decades ago, and sharing her story, she actually paved the way for the Me Too movement. Paula Coughlin was one of the first to ring the bell of the Me Too movement long before it was called that. In 1991, she attended the Tailhook Symposium at the Las Vegas Hilton, a large-scale gathering for naval aviators. It became a partying mob, targeting women who walked a stretch of third-floor hallway known as the Gauntlet.
I took the military leadership for their word that they wanted to change the way this culture had precipitated my attack. But it didn't take long for me to realize the military, to this day, I believe, are still more concerned with not getting caught rather than not having it in their command.
Do you think that there is, in this culture, in this day and age, the scenario where tailhook could happen again?
Yes.
And she's continuing to advocate because even after all of this time, there's still a lot of work to be done on this issue, and we're going to continue to follow it.
All right, terrific. Thanks, Josie. When we come back to the special roundtable edition of Full Measure, what was some of our most popular original reporting? Find out. Welcome back to our roundtable edition of Full Measure. For this segment, we picked just a few of the many stories we covered that you probably didn't see anywhere else. In my case, we're the only ones who reported on an astounding allegation for the government's own pro-vaccine medical expert, a world-renowned neurologist, Dr. Zimmerman, who says that science convinced him that vaccines can cause autism after all in exceptional cases. But now, Dr. Zimmerman has provided remarkable new information. He claims that during the vaccine court hearings all those years ago, he privately told government lawyers that vaccines can and did cause autism in some children. That turnabout from the government's own chief medical expert stood to change everything about the vaccine autism debate, if the public were to find out.
And he has come forward and explained how he told the United States government that vaccines can cause autism in a certain subset of children. And the United States government, the Department of Justice, suppressed his true opinions.
The Justice Department has no comment while an investigation on all of this goes on. Now, Scott, among all the great stories you did a fascinating story on the oil boom. And I'm sure a lot of people knew about this. I had heard nothing of it until you brought back that information.
Right, well, it is one of the stories that seems to be overlooked. And it's about this boost to the economy and to the national security that's really been driven by an oil boom in West Texas in a place called the Permian Basin. Because underneath this ground, a discovery that's changing the global energy game and promising America a brighter, more independent future.
By the time it's done, it's probably going to be the largest oil field in the history of the world.
Tapping into these giant reserves has just made America the #1 crude oil and natural gas producer in the world, outpacing Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Iran.
There's some estimates that put it by 2025 to be exporting upwards of 8 million barrels a day.
More than Iraq.
More than Iraq, which is extraordinary to think about.
That was George P. Bush, by the way, speaking there. He's the commissioner of land there. But this is one of those reasons that you hear President Trump, specifically in his State of the Union address, continue to say that that America now has energy independence, and they truly have moved up the ladder significantly because of this find.
Really good story. Perhaps one of our most interesting and relevant stories touched upon healthcare costs, I think, and why more people aren't trying a very simple solution. For that, we went to Montana, where we met a remarkable woman who accomplished what nearly everybody said was impossible.
Our story begins a few years back, about 2,000 miles from Washington, D.C., in Helena, Montana, where Marilyn Bartlett was assigned to tackle the seemingly impossible.
People that told you it couldn't be done?
Absolutely. People that told me it could not be done.
When we talk about what's the issue with healthcare today, a lot of people say the issue is getting everybody insured. This was not really the approach that you took.
You're right. I don't agree with that. I think the solution is getting the costs affordable. And I did not take the approach of insurance for everyone. I found a lot of waste just with the insurance part.
She began by comparing charges from 2 different hospitals for similar knee replacements.
And one came in around $30,000 and the other at $105,000.
Huge difference.
I just kept asking why? Why? Well, the implant was much more expensive. Well, can I see the invoice? Can I see what you paid? No, that's private. You can't see that. So I couldn't get to the information. It was frustrating. I couldn't get to the answers. And one particular hospital said, well, we don't really know our costs.
Now, it seems to me a page could be taken from that book nationally, but nobody so far is trying, even talking about this possibility outside the insurance system. Josie, you did a fascinating story. We've been talking about this since the first season of Full Measure, kind of digging into America's nuclear power industry and what's going on with that.
And there are big construction projects happening. They cost billions of dollars, but there's also huge potential for failure here, and it raises a lot of questions about the future for nuclear energy.
Every time Steve Prenovitz looks at his monthly power bill, he gets angry.
Pretty much everything has been passed on to the ratepayer.
This is the source of his anger, the Vogtle nuclear plant in Waynesboro, Georgia, operated by Georgia Power. Crews nearby are working on Vogtle's 2 new reactors that have become the face of the industry's problems in this country. Reactors 3 and 4 are years behind schedule and more than a jaw-dropping $10 billion over budget so far, a seemingly bottomless pit supported by federal taxpayers. Greg Yatsko, the former nuclear regulator, now says it's time for America to face a harsh reality check.
Do you view nuclear power as essential to our power grid at this point, given all the alternatives?
Not at all. I think we have many, many alternatives.
So they remain confident that project you saw under construction there, that thing is going to get done.
And one of the many things I loved about the story, which we all try to do when we examine an issue like that, it's not we're shoving one view down your throat. We're actually showing both sides and letting people make what they wish of the information and decide for themselves.
Absolutely.
Okay, if you've heard a lot of news really in the past year or so about Roundup, I think we were some of the most aggressive at covering these lawsuits on the front end against Monsanto. Is it Monsanto or Bayer or both?
Well, Bayer owns Monsanto now, and my producer, Andrea Nedjman, and I started looking into this long before the landmark verdict that happened earlier this year, late last year in the case, against the company that makes the popular weed killer Roundup. Attorney Timothy Litzenberg represented Dwayne Lee Johnson, a former school groundskeeper who routinely used Roundup, the popular weed killer you find at stores, on farms, and in homes all over the country. The jury awarded $289 million to Johnson, saying Monsanto failed to warn the public about the risks of glyphosate. Months later, a judge upheld the decision, but reduced some of the damages, lowering the total to $78 million. Key to the case against Monsanto was testimony that the company polluted the science. As part of the discovery phase of Johnson's trial, Monsanto turned over company correspondence, putting millions of internal emails and texts in public view.
When I understood there was litigation documents, I thought this is a trove, a treasure chest of information that the public should know about. They should know about what was behind the scenes in shaping the scientific viewpoint about glyphosate or Roundup.
So one of the interesting facets that came out of this case was litigation documents that questioned whether or not Monsanto doctored the science, whether there was ghostwriting going on, and all of this has been something that we've talked about in a number of our different Full Measure stories throughout the season.
So why seems like there are now a cascade of cases. Why isn't this a class action lawsuit?
With health-related cases, judges are reluctant to create a class action class because everybody's body is different and everybody responds to things differently. So each one of these cases, and there's thousands of them on deck now, are awaiting trial against Monsanto/Bayer.
That's what they're still doing with the old tobacco lawsuits in Florida. Very interesting. When we come back, some of the incredible visuals from our travels this season. Welcome back to our roundtable. As part of our reporting, we see some amazing sights and scenes around the world. We picked a couple of them. You might be surprised to learn that the one I picked was this toxic, horrible Superfund site in Montana that was amazingly spectacular to look at. And we took drones up and aerial shots. I mean, look at this, y'all. I mean, it's literally poisonous, but beautiful and stunning. And I might add, they're trying to clean it up, and they finally may be making inroads. Well, look at that scenery. What do you think about that, Scott?
I mean, it's postcard worthy despite what's in there.
Yeah. What about you? Do you have
you talk about pits. We went to a pit, not a toxic one of that level, but perhaps a lot of people would want to avoid. So not for the squeamish. If you look at this one, we were in Sweetwater, Texas. And
oh no.
Yeah, this is the world's largest rattlesnake roundup. They've been doing it for more than 60 years, and they bring in all these rattlesnakes that they measure, they study for science, they harvest them, which is controversial, obviously, but then also they do things like this, where we did a little reporter involvement. This is milking a rattlesnake for venom that they use for anti-venom and research, and I stupidly said, yeah, I'd love to give that a shot. But I got out of there without a bite, and that's a small victory in itself, I guess.
Were you scared? Have you handled snakes before?
I've never before, and so I wasn't scared at the moment, and then when I got back to the hotel room,
you're like,
that's when I had a minor panic attack about what I'd just done.
Now the bucket list, though, you've checked that one off.
We'll keep going.
You can rent them out for parties. Snake
milk a rattlesnake.
Yes.
That's quite the bucket list.
It's a talent. It's on the resume now.
Josie, what about you?
We made an amazing trip to Nevada to see the federal government's wild horse population. It was an absolutely stunning trip. I mean, you go out into the middle of nowhere by about 100 miles, make a left turn into the range, and just keep on driving. There is no one out there, and you get to see these wild, majestic animals in herds, and it just completely slows you down. You see how they live, and it is just amazing, amazing to be part of.
I definitely prefer that to
the snakes. Yes.
No offense, because that was amazing.
And
what
you
did.
can't handle the wild horses. Yet, first of all, they won't let you get anywhere near them.
Really?
As soon as you get within a football field of them, they are hightailing it out of there. But good for you.
If only snakes did the same.
Yes.
And Lisa.
So producer Mark Orchard and I went down to the Kennedy Space Center, and it was like unleashing two 5-year-olds at Disney World. I mean, we're both space nerds, and this was such a dream assignment for us. That is me in front of the Crawler, which is one of the 10 largest self-powered land vehicles in the world. Its top speed is 1 mile an hour, and that is used to move spacecraft from the vehicle assembly building to Launch Pad 39, or all of the Launch Pad 39s, I should say. We got to go out onto Launch Pad 39A, which we're going to see a picture of here in a minute, I'm sure. I was so excited because 39A is where they launched the Apollo missions from.
Okay.
So we got to go out there.
Do they still use it for anything, or is it just sort of a memorial?
No, right now it's used by SpaceX.
Okay.
So it's the legacy there is incredible, and I even took a rock from the drive that the crawler takes all the way up to 39A. So I got my little souvenir. Awesome. It was a great
That's
day.
awesome.
We had the best day. Yeah.
Definitely nerdy, but in a good way.
So
I'm the
fun.
same way.
Yeah.
When we come back to our roundtable, we're going to answer a couple of your questions. We're back with our Full Measure Roundtable. Some of you submitted questions for us to answer on this Roundtable program. We picked a couple of them. Here's one from Sarah. She asked, good question, how do you keep your facts straight in the age of social media and fake news? Josie?
It's all about research, and I have to give credit to our producers. They do a ton of fact-checking every step of the way, not just as we research the story, but once we've written the script, before it goes to air, it's going through every single point to make sure we can prove it.
But Scott, when the fact checks happen, how do you know whose facts, if you're checking, prove to be the right ones to be
Well,
checked?
you have to go to the source, right? So it's not just citing someone else's publication.
Right.
It's getting that information directly, and that's where a lot of those long hours are spent. It's a rigorous process, but thankfully it's not just one person. There's a really great team, as you know, here at Full Measure, so everyone's kind of dipping into their own knowledge and resources, and eventually you feel very, very confident you've got it right.
Having great, reliable sources, always checking the facts, and then checking the data. I mean, what we've come across a lot with a lot of our research is you see a document cited, then you go find that document and make sure it's actually what whomever told you it was about is actually about, because people like to take things out of context.
That's absolutely
you really
right.
got to find all of the information in context and then decide if it is what you were told that it is.
I echo that. The original sourcing, we use a professional fact checker as well on our stories where we need the extra check. In addition to that, we have a lawyer that looks over our scripts when there's any sort of legal questions, so we have a lot of that. Okay, why is 5G infrastructure going full steam ahead when we haven't done any safety testing? And coincidentally, that is going to be the subject of a cover story this fall for Full Measure, so stay tuned for that. So thanks to all of you, and thanks to our viewers who I know appreciate our original program each week. And now a nod to all the behind-the-scenes people who help bring Full Measure to you every week. Sometimes you see them on social media. We'll see you this fall for Season 5.